This is Alan for Ajax and Advantage. This is an overview of my new PLO HUD. I'm going to show you what's special about this HUD and why you as a PLO player should consider investing in an advanced HUD and what separates my HUD from other PLO HUDs. This HUD is designed to give you the best possible idea of how your opponents play against you specifically. Any HUD's going to tell you how somebody plays generally, but what we're really interested in is how do individual opponents play against us. First, let's talk about the stats. All the stats on the HUD and many of the stats in the pop-ups are dynamic. By dynamic, I mean the stats have three levels. Level 1 is versus all, level 2 is versus reg, and level 3 is versus hero. The HUD will automatically switch from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 when the sample size for that next level is large enough that it provides more reliable information. Level 1 versus all is much like it sounds. Frequencies versus the entire player pool. Now I do have a couple twists to these stats that improve their accuracy. For any stat that is facing a bet, I'm going to ignore undersized bets, for example, facing a min C bet in a single raise pot. I'm also going to exclude all-in or effectively all-in bets in spots where a 100 big blind stack would never be all-in. Level 2 versus reg uses all the same bet size criteria as level 1, but the opponent must be a reg-defined player. Versus reg acts as a proxy for versus hero until the versus hero sample size comes in. Level 3 versus hero removes all bet size criteria and only reflects their play against you. Bringing up the stat pop-up will show you what level that stat is on. You can see at the top of the pop-up that this player's fold versus flop c-bet heads up in a single raise pot is at level 2 versus reg. Each of our stats has their own pop-up. I don't like large pop-ups for like just pre-flop play, post-flop play with 100 or more stats in it. I think it's really difficult to find the information that you're looking for. Instead, we use individual pop-ups for each stat that only reflects information for that specific spot. If you want to find, for example, if you want to find play versus a flop c-bet in a 3-bet pot, you go to the fold versus flop c-bet in a 3-bet pot pop-up, and I'll have all the same information arranged in a very similar way so that once you learn the pop-ups, you'll be able to find the information pretty quickly. Yes, you do have to learn a number of different pop-ups, but the structure of the pop-ups is similar enough. The amount of information each pop-up is limited enough that I think this is a much more effective method. In addition, we extensively use range graphs in our HUD, and the only way to do that and not have 100 range graphs in a single pop-up is to have all these individual pop-ups. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, and that is range graphs. Range graphs are pretty much what they sound like. They will tell you your opponent's known ranges in specific spots. For facing flop c-bet heads up in a single raise pot, we only have range graphs related to that spot. So up at the top here we have a bunch of cold call, limp call, complete type range graphs. So no matter what situation you find yourself in, you can look at your opponent's pop-up and see all their known hands. Now you can look at the spark graphs and get a general idea of their hand strength. More sparks to the left means their hands are weak. More sparks to the right means their hands are strong. Or you can just hover over the description and you'll see all the hands that they used in that specific spot. At the bottom of this pop-up, you'll see some aggression range graphs, which would be donk bet and then bet versus a missed c-bet. To the right of these, you have bet size scatter graphs, and so you can see any connection between your opponent's bet size and hand strength. And you can even hover over individual hands and see exactly what the holdings were, what the board texture was, what the action was, what the bet sizing was, and you have the same feature in this little replay button, and it'll show you both known and unknown hands here. And if you ever find yourself in a tough spot and you have the time, you can get a pretty detailed look at exactly what your opponents are doing in these specific spots. This is one of my favorite pop-ups, which is Bet River. You can see our opponent's ranges with different river pot sizes and all-in river bets and river raises, along with all the scatter graphs for bet sizing to see if there's any connection between bet size and hand strength. These range graphs will switch to versus hero when the sample size is large enough. The two pop-ups that I showed you is just two of many pop-ups. There are range graphs for pretty much any situation you find yourself in. It's just a question of getting a large enough sample size to get actionable information. Last, let's talk about badges. Badges are all about exploitive poker, pointing out where an opponent is folding at clearly exploitable frequencies. There's a number of things in my badges that separates out my Note Caddy HUD from other Note Caddy HUDs. First off, my badges all use multiple stats. So let's take the green CF badge. Green background means on the flop, CF means check fold, and so this is opponent misses the out of position flop C bet, and the green CF badge represents that they will check fold at an exploitable level. Now you may also see that a number of these badges, some of these badges have white tops, some of these badges don't have white tops. A non-white top badge means they're level 1 exploitable. They're mathematically exploitable, but not highly exploitable. If they get a white top, it simply means that they're folding a ton in this spot, and it's a spot that we don't want to miss. This CF badge it'll check their check fold frequency in this spot. If it's high enough, it'll activate the badge. Now, it'll also calculate their call frequency versus an in-position stab, and then fold versus the turn bet. That's how the combo stats work, and the badge will be slightly altered. It'll become half green, half blue, still CF, and that'll represent that this player's exploitability is versus the in-position flop stab plus the turn follow-up, and you'll be able to clearly see that. I just brought up another HUD that has more combo move exploitability. So for example, this badge here is single raise pot. They miss the flop C bet in position. They will fold to the turn stab plus river follow-up, half blue, half red, at a highly exploitable level. White top, these are barrel badges versus an in-position EP or MP C bet. High exploit, fold turn plus river versus button C bet, fold turn plus river. This is versus a in-position delayed C bet, fold turn plus river, high exploit. One of the things that really surprised me when I was developing this HUD was the amount of value given up by a lot of players when they have combo move exploitability. I mean, it makes sense, right? They're allowing a pot to blow it up and then folding. They're not necessarily even playing incorrectly, because a lot of players are not capable of bluffing enough in those combo spots, but still, it's important to recognize where players are doing that, where players are forcing you to put in that additional bet, and if we can take advantage of that at least a slightly higher frequency, that should work in our favor as long as we're picking out decent spots to do so. Now, a potential issue here is, let's say you're taking advantage of this combo fold versus out of position turn stab plus river bet, the high exploit badge, and you're constantly going after this player. This player sees how much you're betting and they adjust. Well, we've taken care of that. Inside of each badge is a versus hero check. While checking their general fold frequency, it'll also be checking their recent play versus you, and if their play versus you has started to change, it will cancel out the badge. If they've just had a run of good cards and that stopped them from folding so much, the badge will only be temporarily canceled out, and once their frequencies return to average, the badge will reappear. If the change is permanent, the badges will continue to be canceled out. And so imagine this. You're using the badges to drive your bluffing in a spot like this. This player has a high exploit badge, so you're abusing him as much as you feel comfortable. He changes his play versus you over a fairly short sample size. The badge disappears, you adjust, and now you're much more value heavy. So now you have an opponent who typically doesn't defend very much, and now he's defending a lot more, but your ranges are quite a bit more value heavy. That puts your opponent in a very, very bad spot. And what will oftentimes happen is players will adjust to you, especially if you get really active with using these badges, but then the badge disappears and they don't even realize that you've stopped. But then after a while, they get tired of always seeing value hands, and they tend to fade back into their natural frequencies, their average frequencies, and once the sample gets large enough and confirms that their play has switched back, then the badge will reappear and you can go back to your old style. This badge system is designed to keep you a step ahead of your opponents, and there's really not a lot they can do versus this badge system. Next, let's talk about the float badges. We can see a couple examples here. We can see an FLT, which is float in position. FLO is float out of position. The white bottom represents a 3-bet pot. The white top means highly exploitable. So this badge is indicating that this player, when he is 3-betting out of position, he will play after that 3-bet exploitable. And if we go over to the post-flop HUD, we can see his exploitability. First off, he's getting another in-position float badge versus his flop C bet. So white bottom, 3-bet pot, green background is flop. White top means highly exploitable. And so this is telling us that we should be calling when we're in position, floating his flop C bet a little bit wider than we normally. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to take advantage of his high check fold on the turn. So the combination of his turn C bet in a 3-bet pot plus his check fold is exploitable enough that we can call more hands than we normally would pre-flop. Now, we're going to go crazy here and call with anything? Of course not. But there's always those borderline hands, those hands that are not quite good enough to use in a specific situation. And these badges are meant to alert you to spots where those hands that were formerly just barely not good enough, not quite good enough, are probably now good enough. Now, the trick is, though, you've got to be able to read the post-flop HUD and see where your opponent's exploitability is. The FLT and 3-bet pots, usually the exploitability will be on the flop check fold, but sometimes it's versus the turn check fold. But once you learn these badges, it's I mean, I can see things like this in a split second. And I look here, I look to the right, and I see where the exploitability is, and then I decide how much I want to expand my ranges. If their exploitability is on the flop, that's a little bit easier spot, and so I'm going to be willing to go a little bit wider because I'm not going to have to do that double float. By double float, I mean call the 3-bet in position, call the flop C bet, and then try to take it away on the turn. Since I can see that his exploitability is going to require that, and I'm going to have to take it away on the turn, I'm going to want a little bit stronger hand, and I'm not going to expand my ranges as far as I would versus a flop exploitability. Down here for the second HUD, we can see a flop float out of position badge single raise pot. No white bottom means this is single raise pot. FLO, the O means out of position. So this is telling us that when faced with a flop C bet from this player, that we can call with wider than normal ranges. And if we look to the right, we can see why that is. So first off, this player has a fold versus check raise badge on the turn. 13 out of 21 times when faced with a turn check raise, 62% of the time, they have folded. So that's obviously mathematically exploitable. And they also have a high exploit fold versus river stab. So the combination of their turn double barrel plus their fold versus river stab is high enough. In fact, it's 69%. You can see here in the pop-up that there is enough exploitability to activate this out of position float badge. Now, once again, you're not going to float with any 4 cards, but the way the badges are set up, you technically could. The badges are not giving any type of equity credit to these plays. It's just simply saying by the numbers, are you going to make money floating in this spot just by following the badges that come after? Lastly, we have some river bet size exploitability badges. The B is bluff, the V is value, and this is just calculating their fold frequency and call frequency and telling us what sizing is going to give us for bluffing the best risk versus reward, and for value betting the most profit. Now in PLO, how much can you use these? I'm not sure. In the PLO players I've looked at, it seems like a lot of players have this 1-bar bluff, 3-bar value, which is saying that half pot betting on the river gives you the best risk versus reward, and the 3-bar value is saying that 80 to 100% pot bets give you the best value based upon their call frequency. Now, obviously, a bigger bet size is going to make us more money, but it's their call frequency plus the sizing, and so I mean, it's totally possible that somebody's call frequency will be much higher versus a smaller sizing, but the question is it high enough to make up for the missing big blinds for the value bets? And for the most part, it's not. But obviously, we can't do half pot for bluff, 90% pot size for value every time. But in some marginal situations, you can perhaps shift your betting 10 or 20% in the direction of these badges. Yeah, the bet sizing badges are difficult to use, but I think it's useful having them in the HUD. If you want to check out the documentation for the HUD, just send me an email at aja@notecaddy.com. I have a 15-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. If you don't like the HUD, just send me an email and I'll refund your money. Now, if you want to purchase this HUD, you will need to own NoteCaddy Omaha. Now, the money-back guarantee is just for my HUD, not for the NoteCaddy purchase. That's a separate program. But anyway, if you want to check it out, you definitely should. If you have any questions, just email me.